Good evening. How's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you on a Tuesday. Let's light up the darkness. We'll be keeping a close eye on the stream. I apologize that we got cut off in the middle of a question at the end of yesterday's class. It was just kind of an unusual... We've had all kinds of glitches. We haven't had that particular glitch. So just be trying to pay attention, but everything seems to be streaming properly. So please God, may it stay that way. Who's in the house? Stephen in New Hampshire, Nancy in North Carolina, Shandora in the Bronx, John in Maine, Joe in the Inland Empire, Bella in Florida. Bill, shalom from mid-Missouri. I'm officially beginning fall break with some Talmud learning. Fantastic. Sharon in New Jersey, Joseph in Massachusetts. Joseph, curious what happened last night. That's what I'm saying. Some kind of a glitch. Hopefully it won't repeat. Excuse me. Lucy in Minnesota. Karen in Northern California. Joseph liked that nigun that Moshe was singing. Guy in Ohio. Melissa in Great Neck. Ella says shalom. Aoife in Florida. Marjorie in Georgia. Welcome, everybody. Today's episode of AT Daily, sponsored by Christine Orich, dedicated to the great state of Israel and the IDF. Stand strong and proud. The world needs you. Amen. Beautiful dedication, Christine. May you and all your loved ones be showered in blessings, and thank you for enabling us to share more Torah with more people around the world. Let me say amen. All right. Still streaming. Very good. Okay, let's do this. Some very interesting material tonight. We are continuing our discussion of Mishnah number 1 here in chapter 2 of Tractate Bava Kamma, the 21st volume of the Talmud. Our daf tonight is page 19, and we're picking this up right near the top of page 19a. So recall that we've been talking about, in terms of animals causing damages, and especially when we're looking at these categories of trampling, of eating, of goring that an ox could do, and we're making very important distinctions that produce some different results, right? So first of all, in terms of goring, we said, right, there's a difference between innocuous and forewarned. Has the animal behaved this way before, so that the owner is, it's foreseeable to him or her that the animal could behave this way? Again, there's a pattern of behavior. So the first question is it a typical behavior or an atypical behavior? But if it's an atypical behavior of these animals generally, what about your animal? Has your animal behaved that way several times before? Also, where is this happening? Is it in the public domain? Is it in the private domain of the owner of the animal that does the damage? Is it in the private domain of the owner of the animal that is damaged, or the property that is damaged? What about recourse for damages? Are we only going to look to the animal itself, selling it, slaughtering it, and its value is what is going to be used to pay the damages? Or are we going to be able to go after the property of its owner, including seizing the superior quality land that he has in order to satisfy this debt of damages once he's found liable? And also, if the owner's animal caused damage, how direct was that damage, right? If the animal gored another animal with its horns, okay, obviously very direct. But if while it was walking, it kicks up a bunch of pebbles and the pebbles fly and cause damage, that's very different. What if it kicks a vessel and the vessel rolls, and in rolling it breaks another vessel? What if a vessel rolls and it sets another vessel in motion that sets another vessel in motion? How attenuated is the chain of events, and how does that affect the degree of damages that we're going to assess? All right, let's continue. Rav Ashi raises a dilemma. Is there any halakhic significance to deviation from typical behavior with regard to propelling pebbles? And therefore, if an animal propelled pebbles in an atypical manner, its owner is liable to pay 1/4 of the damage, i.e. half the restitution for damage caused by pebbles, right? We already said that if a person's ox tramples the property of another person in their domain, right, in their public domain, in their private domain, so then the owner is liable for all the damages. But if the animal is walking and it kicks up pebbles, so we have a decree that that's going to create half damages, right? The owner's going to be liable for half the damages. Well, that's in the sort of, if it's an animal that normally kicks pebbles as it walks. Okay, but what if the animal normally doesn't kick up pebbles, but there was a little pile of pebbles that happened to be there that no one else saw, and that got kicked, right? So it's pebbles, but it's a quite irregular occurrence of pebbles being kicked by the animal. So are we going to chop the damages in half one more time? Right, so do we assess just 1/4 of the damage because not only is it pebbles, but it's a deviation from the normal manner of kicking pebbles? Or is there no halakhic significance to deviation from typical behavior with regard to propelling pebbles, resulting in its owner being liable to pay only 1/4 of the damage, and therefore even in an atypical case, the owner pays the standard restitution of half the cost of the damage because it was a case of kicking pebbles? And the Gemara answers, resolve Rav Ashi's dilemma from Rava's dilemma. As Rava raises a dilemma, is there forewarning for pebbles or is there no forewarning for pebbles, right? So this would indicate that if an animal normally kicks pebbles and he's been warned that your animal kicks pebbles and it causes damage, and that's happened twice already, then the third time he's going to be like a forewarned ox as opposed to an innocuous ox. But does that concept of innocuous and forewarning apply to pebbles? So based on that dilemma, one may conclude by inference that there is no halakhic significance to deviation from typical behavior with regard to pebbles propelled by an animal, resulting in its owner being liable to pay only 1/4 of the damage. As, were that the case, forewarning would lead to an animal owner's liability to pay half the cost of the damage. But the Gemara rejects this analysis. Perhaps Rava stated his dilemma employing the style of if you say. What does this mean? If you say that there is no halakhic significance to deviation from typical behavior with regard to propelling pebbles, resulting in its owner being liable to pay only 1/4 of the damage, and the owner pays half the cost of the damage in every case of pebbles being propelled, well, is there forewarning for pebbles? Meaning that after 3 incidents, the owner pays the full cost of the damage? Or is there no forewarning for pebbles? So according to that understanding, the law with regard to Rav Ashi's dilemma cannot be inferred from the dilemma that Rava posed, and Rav Ashi's dilemma shall stand. Teku, we don't have an answer to this question. Now, Rav Ashi raises a different dilemma, also with regard to pebbles. According to the opinion of Sumakos, that one pays the full cost of the damage in the case of propelled pebbles, right? That was the minority opinion. The majority overruled Sumakos, and it's only half the damages. But according to Sumakos, where you pay all the damages, then what is the law with regard to damage caused by a force, generated by a force, generated by the animal's action, right? In other words, the animal walked by and started a chain of events that ultimately resulted in damage. So is the status of that secondary force like that of damage caused by a force generated by its action, just the pebbles, in which case the owner is liable, Or is its status not like that of damage caused by a force generated by its action, right? So once, okay, the animal kicks, pebbles go flying, pebbles damage something, pay half the damages. Animal kicks, pebbles fly, they knock over a can, the can rolls, and then the rolling can causes damage. Does that intermediate event change the damages or not? So the Gemara elaborates. And this is according to the opinion of Sumakos, who says that the owner is liable for all damages, full damages, in the case of propelled pebbles. So the Gemara elaborates. Did Sumakos learn the halacha, the law, that one pays half the cost of damage caused by pebbles as a tradition transmitted to Moses at Sinai, and he interprets that tradition as applying in a case where the damage was caused by a force generated by the action of an animal, and by contrast, in a typical case of damage caused by pebbles, which is an example of a force generated by the action of the animal, the owner pays the full cost of the damage. Right? In other words, Sumakos is saying, if the animal kicks pebbles and they cause damage, you pay the full cost of damages. If the animal kicks pebbles and the pebbles knock over a can and the can rolls and that causes damages, that's when you pay half the damages. That's if Sumakos sees it that way. Which is an example of force generated by the action of an animal, the owner pays the full cost of the damage, as it is a subcategory of trampling, right? So Sumakos would say, according to this view, that when the animal just kicks pebbles and it does damage, he pays the full cost, because that's just like trampling. You only go to the half cost when you remove the damage one further degree. Or perhaps Sumakos did not learn any law as a tradition in this regard at all, and therefore, even in a case where the damage was caused by a force generated by the action of an animal, the owner pays the full cost of the damage, right, according to Sumakos, as it is still a subcategory of trampling. And the Gemara concludes, this dilemma too shall stand unresolved. So we don't know if Sumakos will hold to his view if it's animal kicks pebbles, does damage, or animal kicks pebbles, kicks can, rolls, and does damage. Maybe he's going to charge full damages there too. We don't know. Sumakos wasn't around when they were having this discussion. New subject. The Mishna teaches if the animal was kicking while it was walking, or it occurred that pebbles were inadvertently propelled from under its feet, and those pebbles broke vessels, the owner of the animal pays half the cost of the damage. Good. That squares with what we've learned so far. Now, a dilemma was raised before the sages with regard to what case is the Tana of the Mishnah speaking. Well, doesn't it sound like we know the case? The animal was kicking, it propelled pebbles, the pebbles broke a vessel. But that's not specific enough. And the Gemara elaborates, is the Tana saying that if the animal was kicking and caused damage directly with its kick, which is a subcategory of goring, or if the animal was walking and propelled pebbles in its typical manner, the owner of the animal pays half the cost of the damage, and accordingly, the Mishnah is in accordance with the opinion of the rabbis, who hold that one pays half the cost of damage caused by pebbles. Or perhaps the Tana is saying if the animal was kicking and caused damage directly with its kick, or if the animal propelled pebbles due to its kick, and the pebbles cause damage, the owner of the animal pays half the cost of the damage. And accordingly, one may infer, but if the animal propelled pebbles as it was walking in its typical manner, the owner pays the full cost of the damage. And if so, in accordance with whose opinion is the Mishnah? It is in accordance with the opinion of Sumakos, right? So we've already said, we established, if the animal's walking and it inadvertently kicks pebbles and the pebbles break vessels, okay, half damages, according to the majority. Sumakos would say pay the full damages. If the animal kicks another animal, so that's goring, right? Kicking is like goring. The animal is not eating. It's not its normal thing. It's not normally going around kicking other animals. So what happens if the animal kicks, but not kicks another animal directly, but rather kicks pebbles? right? So that's a little bit different. I mean, is the animal purposely trying to kick pebbles that are gonna hurt another thing? What is it, just kicking out, kind of lashing out, and it's actually kind of ordinary behavior. It's sort of like extending its leg. It's kind of a kicking motion, and that's what caused the pebbles to be propelled. Let's keep reading. Now, the Gemara suggests, come in here, a resolution to this dilemma from the latter clause of the Mishnah. If an animal trod upon a vessel and broke it, and then a shard of that vessel fell upon a second vessel and broke it, the owner pays the full cost of the damage for the first vessel, and he pays half the cost of the damage for the latter vessel. And if the Mishnah is in accordance with the opinion of Sumakos, does he hold that one pays half the cost of the damage caused by the pebbles? And if you would say that the Mishnah is in accordance with the opinion of Sumakos and can be understood like this, that the first vessel concerning which the owner of the animal pays the full cost of the damage is the first vessel damaged following the propelling of shards from the vessel upon which the animal trod, i.e. the second vessel that was broken, and the second vessel concerning which the owner of the animal pays half the cost of the damage is actually the second vessel following the propelling of shards from the vessel upon which the animal trod, meaning a third vessel was broken in this conflagration. Then what do we have? And the reason for the difference in liability is that there is a difference, according to Sumakos, between damage caused by a force generated by the action of an animal when it trod on the first vessel, for which the owner pays full cost of the damage, and damage caused by a force generated by its action, for which he pays only the half cost, right? That we could interpret this Mishnah according to Sumakos by saying, well, the animal trod, I guess walked over a vessel, broke it. When it broke, a shard of that vessel went flying. It broke a second vessel, and Sumakos might agree that is full. Might say that's full cost also. But when that second vessel then broke or rolled and broke, yet another vessel, maybe there we go to half damages, or maybe we go to half damages on the second vessel. Let's see. But if one were to say this explanation, what can be said of that dilemma which Rav Ashi raised? According to the opinion of Sumakos, that one pays the full cost of the damage in a case of propelled pebbles. What is the law with regard to damage caused by a force generated by the animal's action? Is the status of that secondary force like that of damage caused by a force generated by its action, in which case the owner is liable, or is its status not like that of damage caused by a force generated by its action? Why does he have a dilemma? Let him resolve from here that its status is not like that of damage caused by a force generated by its action. And the Gemara answers, perhaps Rav Ashi interprets the Mishnah in accordance with the opinion of the rabbis, the majority, who disagree with Sumakos. The rabbis say, as soon as it's not the animal walking on the object, but kicking pebbles, then already we're in a case of half damages. And if we're going to attenuate further than that, are we still in half damages, or are we going to go to no damages? Let's see. So Rav Ashi interprets the Mishnah in accordance with the opinion of the rabbis, that one pays half the cost of the damage in the case of propelled pebbles, and he raises this dilemma. If the animal was kicking and caused damage directly with its kick, this is a subcategory of goring. Or if the animal was walking and propelled pebbles in its typical manner, the owner of the animal pays half the cost of the damage. So accordingly, one may infer, but if the pebbles were propelled due to a kick as opposed to walking, then the owner pays 1/4 of the damage. And there is halakhic significance to deviation from typical behavior with regard to a case of pebbles, resulting in its owner being liable to pay only 1/2 of the damage, i.e. 1/4. Or perhaps the Tana is saying if the animal was kicking and caused damage directly with its kick, or if the animal propelled pebbles due to its kick and the pebbles caused damage, the owner of the animal pays half the cost of the damage, and there is no halakhic significance to deviation from typical behavior with regard to a case of pebbles. Does it matter if pebbles broke the vessel, whether the pebbles were propelled by the animal's walking or by the animal's more unusual kicking of the pebbles? Says the Gemara, Taiku. The dilemma shall stand. New subject. Rabbi Abba bar Memel raised the dilemma before Rabbi Ami. And some say that Rabbi Chia bar Abba, that it was before Rabbi Chia bar Abba. If the animal was walking in a place where it is impossible for it to walk without propelling pebbles, as it proceeds, and it kicked and propelled pebbles and caused damage, then what is the law? Right now, what they're really saying, the way I hear it, is, okay, generally speaking, it's unexpected, unusual that an animal, just because it's walking, is also kicking pebbles, and those pebbles are being kicked hard enough to do damage. But if they do, okay, it's half damages. Well, but what if the owner has an animal that is going to be led through an area where it's inevitable that pebbles will be kicked, and perhaps even inevitable that those pebbles will hit something? Then are we going to say, hey, that's not the category of pebbles anymore. That's like an animal being forewarned with respect to pebbles, or that's a situation where damage has to ensue. The guy should have known better. I mean, it's a little bit like walking your ox through a china shop. I mean, what are you going to say? It was, he never broke china before. Yeah, but you never walked him through a china shop before. So now what happens? Does one say that since it is impossible for it to walk without propelling pebbles, then propelling pebbles is its typical manner in that situation, and the law in this case would be the same as any case of pebbles? Or perhaps, since now in any event the pebbles were propelled due to a kick, it is different. The Gemara concludes, Rabbi Abba bar Memel's dilemma shall stand unresolved. They weren't even asking, if you're taking them through an area where the pebbles must be propelled, are we going to change its degree of damages? We're saying if it's in that kind of an area, and while it was there, it kicked pebbles as opposed to just tossing them by its walking, does it change? Are we going out of the taiku? The dilemma is unresolved, and the answer is no. The dilemma is still unresolved. So Rabbi Yirmiyah raised a dilemma before Rabbi Zera. If the animal was walking in the public domain and it kicked and propelled pebbles and caused damage, what is the law? Right now, trampling and eating, you pay the full cost of the damages, but only if it happens in the private domain of the person whose property was damaged. If it happens in the public domain, the owner is exempt. Why? Because you shouldn't have left your produce lying around where somebody, doing some, like a normal act of leading his ox through a public domain, which is permitted, and you left your produce lying on the ground. Okay, it got trampled. You shouldn't have left it lying there. As opposed to goring, right, which if innocuous, half damages, if a forewarned ox, full damages, even in the public domain. But eating and trampling, exempt in the public domain. What about pebbles? What about pebbles? Are we going to say that pebbles is related to trampling and therefore it's an exemption in the public domain? Let's see. Happen in the public domain. So the Gemara elaborates. Do we liken the damage in this instance to goring, since the action was performed with intent? The animal kicked and propelled pebbles. It wasn't walking. It kicked the pebbles, right? Kicking is already akin to goring because it's not the usual behavior of an animal to kick somebody's property or to kick another animal. So what if it kicked the pebbles in the public domain? Right, so the Gemara says, do we liken the damage in this instance to goring, since the action was performed with intent, the animal kicked? And therefore the owner of the animal is liable even though the incident transpired in the public domain. Or perhaps since this is a case of pebbles, and pebbles is normally associated with trampling, that it kicks pebbles as it walks, and so this is a subcategory of trampling. And for trampling, one is exempt from liability in the public domain. And Rabbi Zera said to him, it stands to reason that even kicking pebbles, where he was just kicking, not walking, is still a subcategory of trampling. So Rabbi Yirmiyah continued and asked Rabbi Zera another question. If an animal propelled pebbles in the public domain and caused damage on private property. Now we're not saying, so he's saying even according to Rabbi Zera, what he just said, well, whether you kick it or it happens in the course of walking, it's still part of trampling, not goring. Okay, well now let's say your animal, whether it was kicking or walking, propelled pebbles from the public domain into the private domain. Right now we know that if the ox walked into the private domain of someone else and there kicked pebbles that damaged that person's property, for sure there's going to be liability. So what about if the pebbles originated in the public domain and ended up doing damage in the private domain of its owner, the one who was damaged? Let's see. Then what is the law? And Rabbi Zera said to him, employing terminology from the laws of Shabbos, if there is no act of lifting here, is there an act of placing here? Since the animal propelled the pebbles in the public domain, the owner is exempt from liability for any damage that it causes. The fact that the damage occurred on private property is not relevant, according to Rabbi Zera, answering Rabbi Yirmiyah. But Rabbi Yirmiyah raised an objection to Rabbi Zera's first statement, that one is exempt from liability for his animal propelling pebbles in the public domain because it is classified as a category of trampling. And Rabbi Yirmiyah raised a baraisa for his objection. If an animal was walking along the way and it propelled pebbles, whether it was on private property and whether it was in the public domain, the owner is liable to pay damages. Very interesting. Even though we're tying this to trampling, and trampling in the public domain, the owner is exempt. But if you're kicking pebbles, now we're talking about it's a half damages situation, but one is still liable in the public domain according to this baraisa. So what happens? And so what? Is it not a case where the pebbles were propelled in the public domain and caused damage in the public domain? And Rabbi Zera replied, no, the reference in the baraisa is to a case where the animal propelled the pebbles in the public domain and caused damage on private property. And then Rabbi Yirmiyah says, whoa, but didn't you say if there is no act of lifting here, there is no act of placing here? That if you made the action in the public domain and the damage was caused in the private domain, that the guy's exempt? You just said that, Rabbi Zera. And Rabbi Zera said to Rabbi Yirmiyah, I retract. I retract my previous statement, as there is proof from the baraisa that there is liability in that case. Rabbi Zera is a big man. He's willing to be proved wrong. Rabbi Yirmiyah raised an objection to Rabbi Zera's first statement from the Mishnah. If an animal trod upon a vessel and broke it, and then a shard of that vessel fell upon a second vessel and broke it, the owner pays the full cost of the damage for the first vessel, as its action is classified under the primary category of trampling, and he pays half the cost of the damage for the latter vessel. And it is taught in a baraisa with regard to this law. In what cases this statement said? It is said in a case where the incident transpired on the private property of the injured party. But if it transpired in the public domain, the owner of the animal is exempt from liability for the first vessel, as it is classified as a subcategory of trampling. And he is liable for the damage to the second vessel. And he is liable for the damage to the second vessel. Isn't that interesting? According to this baraisa, the guy's exempt for his animal damaging the first vessel because it's trampling in the public domain. But the fact that the first vessel broke and sent a shard flying that broke a second vessel, he's going to be liable for that, presumably half the damages, because that is akin to kicking pebbles as you walk. So in other words, amazing, no damages for the first vessel, but yes damages for the second vessel. So what? Is it not that the animal propelled the pebbles in the public domain and it caused damage in the public domain, indicating that one does not pay damage for pebbles in the public domain, now likening shards to pebbles? And Rabbi Zera replied, no, perhaps the reference in the Mishnah is to a case where the animal propelled the pebbles in the public domain and it caused damage on private property, which Rabbi Zera already changed his mind and said he is liable for this. And Rabbi Yirmiyah said, but didn't you say, if there's no active lifting here, there is no active placing? And Rabbi Zera said to him, I retracted my previous statement, right? So now we're saying that Rabbi Zera concludes if the animal kicks pebbles while it's walking in the public domain and the pebbles fly into the private domain and cause damage, yes, liable. How much? Presumably half the cost of the damages, because it's a case of propelling pebbles. Rabbi Yirmiyah is not done with Rabbi Zera. So he raises another objection. He says, is that so? Is the owner of the animal exempt from liability for pebbles propelled by his animal in the public domain? Right, so are you saying, okay, so you said, Rabbi Zera, okay, if he kicks pebbles, propels pebbles from the public domain to the private domain, then damages kick in. Well, what about if it's simply he propels pebbles in the public domain that breaks somebody's property in the public domain? Are you saying he's exempt? But doesn't Rabbi Yochanan say payment of half the cost of the damage is not differentiated between private and public domains, as there is no exemption from payment, neither for damage on private property nor for damage in the public domain? And so what? Is this principle not stated even in a case where the animal propelled pebbles in the public domain and caused damage in the public domain? And Rabbi Zera said to him, no. Rabbi Yochanan stated this principle in a case where the animal propelled pebbles in the public domain and caused damage on private property. But wasn't that teaching of Rabbi Yochanan worded that there is no distinction, it doesn't matter whether it's public or private domain, not the kicking and not the receiving, not where the damage was done. The fact is, if an animal propels pebbles and causes damage, the owner is liable for half the damages. So where is Rabbi Zera getting that? No, he only has to pay damages if they were, if they were kicked in the public domain and caused damage in the private domain. If my animal walked onto your property, and so he kicked the pebbles in your private domain and did damage with those pebbles in your private domain, is it half damages or is it perhaps full damages because it all happened in your domain? Let's keep reading. Rabbi Yirmiyah said to him, but didn't you say, if there is no active lifting here, is there an active placing here? And Rabbi Zera said one more time, I retracted that statement. Stop bringing that up against me. I already said I don't hold by that. Or if you wish, say instead, when Rabbi Yochanan said that payment of half the cost of the damage is not differentiated between private and public domains, and there is no exemption from payment, neither for damage on private property nor for damage in the public domain, he said that only with regard to damage in the category of goring. Is propelling pebbles in the category of goring? No, it's in the category of trampling. And so which in the case of propelling pebbles is related to trampling, and therefore there is no damages when that transpires in the public domain. New question. The Gemara relates that Rabbi Yehuda Nesiya, right, who was the grandson of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, and Rabbi Oshaya sat in the antechamber, the Akila, of Rabbi Yehuda Nesiya. So a matter emerged from among them, and one of them raised a dilemma. If an animal swung its tail and thereby caused damage, what is the law? Right? So is it swinging its tail back and forth and damaging something with its tail? Is that just like walking by and brushing it with its side? And that's really just the normal course of walking. And so this is likened to trampling. Or swinging its tail, is that more like kicking, which is a subcategory of goring, right? Which is something that the animal does intentionally And in this case, it caused damage. So where does the tail fall out? What is the tail? A swinging tail is a subcategory of what? Trampling or goring. So what is the law? And the other sage said to him, must the owner grasp its tail and walk to prevent the animal from causing damage? Since this is typical behavior for the animal, the owner should be exempt from liability. Right? Just trampling, he's exempt in the public domain, swinging the tail also. So the Gemara asks, if so, with regard to damage in the category of goring, also let us say, must the owner grasp its horn and walk to prevent the animal from causing damage? And nevertheless, the law is that the owner is liable for damage in the category of goring. But the Gemara rejects this. How can you compare these two cases? Damage in the category of goring is not caused in the course of the typical behavior of the animal. Consequently, the owner is required to prevent his animal from causing damage in that manner. And this damage caused by the swinging of an animal's tail is caused in the course of its typical behavior, and therefore the owner is required to prevent his animal from causing damage in that manner. And so the Gemara asks, and since this is its typical behavior, what is the dilemma that he raised? Obviously, one has no liability for damage caused by the typical behavior of his animal in the public domain. And the Gemara answers he raised a dilemma with regard to a case of excessive tail swinging. Is excessive tail swinging considered typical behavior? Right? I mean, some animal has a very long tail, and maybe, the animal has developed, some animals are ornery, right? And maybe it has excessive tail swinging that is outside the realm of other animals. Or maybe this particular animal uses its tail and purposely, is annoying the humans around it by breaking things that the humans like. That sounds like it would be in the category of goring. But the Gemara doesn't answer that question. Instead, it poses a different question, which I'm going to read without a trace of humor. And hopefully there are no Beavises and Buttheads in the room. Ravena raises a dilemma. If an animal swung its penis and caused damage, what is the halacha? And the Gemara elaborates, do we say, just as it is with regard to goring, is it not so in a case of goring that the animal's inclination overcame it and caused it to gore? So here too, it is no different. The animal's inclination overcame it, and that is why it caused damage. Or perhaps the cases are different. As in the case of damage in the category of goring with its horns, the objective of its action is to cause damage. Whereas in this case, the objective of its action is not to cause damage. And the Gemara concludes, Teiku, that dilemma shall stand unresolved. Now the Mishnah teaches chickens are deemed forewarned with regard to walking in their typical manner and breaking objects. If there was a string tied to a chicken's leg and it broke a vessel, or if the chicken was hopping in an atypical manner and breaking vessels, its owner pays half the cost of the damage. Rav Huna says they taught that one pays half the cost of the damage only in a case where the string was tied to the leg of the chicken on its own, meaning a string became entangled on the leg of the chicken without involvement of the owner, and an item was broken by the string. But if a person tied the string to the chicken, then he is liable to pay the full cost of the damage, as that string would be in the category of a pit. You see that, going back to the first Mishna of chapter 1, where we learned that these four basic categories, right? The ox, and we've been talking a lot about the ox, goring, trampling, eating, but there was also the fire and the pit, and then there was the mavet, which is a human with his own direct actions. But the pit, okay, somebody dug a hole in the public domain, somebody else fell in it. But the pit is used to cover many, many types of hazards that a person could create. And fire also. And basically the difference between pit and fire is pit refers to all hazards that a person creates that are stationary. And fire refers to a hazard that a person creates which can take on, can keep moving by itself. It might be propelled by the wind. It might, fire catches to other fire, keeps lighting things up. almost like gossip, right? Although that's a different kind of thing. But at any rate, this string, tied to a chicken's leg that then causes damage, you might have thought it might be a little bit like fire, but they're saying it's like a pit, right? Because the string itself is not always in motion. The chicken might be in motion, but the string tied to its leg is a hazard that if a person does that, why does a person attach a string that might cause a hazard? But I'll tell you what could certainly happen. Not so much anymore these days, but when cockfighting was a thing, is a very common betting sport in much of the United States. And these fighting roosters, they would attach metal, razor-sharp spurs to the legs of the rooster so that they could use it, to kill another rooster in the ring, as it were, as a blood sport. But if such a rooster escaped, and now it's got these razor-sharp metal barbs on its legs and ends up harming a person, certainly there would be a difference in damages for that versus a rooster without such a metal barb attached to its leg. Now the Gemara asks, if the string was tied on its own, who is liable to pay half the cost of the damage? If we say it is the owner of the string who pays, as the damage was caused by the string, well, what are the circumstances? If it is a case where the owner of the string concealed the string in a secure place, and the chicken became entangled in it, the owner of the string is a victim of circumstances beyond his control and should be exempt from payment. And if he did not conceal it and instead left it exposed where it could become entangled in the feet of a passing chicken, then he is negligent and liable as though he actually tied the string to the chicken, right? You leave a string lying around where animals or people could become entangled with it, that sounds like you created a pit. And you should be fully liable for those damages. So rather, the case in the Mishnah is one where the owner of the string concealed it and is exempt from liability. And Rav Huna means that the owner of the chicken is liable. Well, here too the question arises, what is different in this case where one is not obligated to pay the full cost of the damage, as it is written, Exodus 21:33, if a man shall open a pit, or if a man shall dig a pit and not cover it, and an ox or a donkey fall therein, he pays the damage. And it is not written, if an ox shall open a pit. This indicates that if an ox opens a pit, the owner of the ox is exempt from liability. Now, with regard to the payment of half the cost of the damage as well, the owner should be exempt from liability. As it is written, if a man shall open a pit. And it is not written, if an ox shall open a pit. Right? So if I uncover your pit and then people fall in it, well, then I will be liable. But if my ox comes along and takes off the cover of your pit, maybe it's going to be deemed that you didn't cover it well enough, that my ox was able to remove the cover of your pit. Or maybe my ox was a very nosy ox. Let's keep reading. Rather, the case in the Mishnah is one where the chicken moved the string and thereby caused damage. Since the chicken did not cause damage with its body, the owner pays half the cost of the damage, as he does in a case of pebbles. And when Rav Huna's distinction between whether the string was tied on its own or by a person was stated, it was stated in a general sense, and not with regard to the law in the Mishnah. With regard to an ownerless string tied to the leg of a chicken, right? Chicken became entangled in an ownerless string. Rav Huna says if the string was tied to the leg of a chicken on its own, the owner of the chicken is exempt. But if some person came along and tied this ownerless string to the chicken, then that person is liable to pay the full cost of the damage. And the Gemara asks, due to what primary category of damage is he liable? And Rav Huna bar Manoach says he is liable due to the fact that although the string is not stationary, as in the standard obstacle in the primary category of pit, nevertheless, this is an example of his pit that is rolled at the feet of a person and at the hooves of an animal, and that too is a subcategory of pit. A pit that is rolled? What is that? In any event, he is not liable according to the law of pit until the obstacle comes to rest and a person or animal stumbles across it. Then somehow it starts to move because a category of pit includes some other things. But for it to be in the category of pit, it has to have time where it's stationary, and that's when somebody became entangled with it. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 1. I'm going to go till here. Okay. So I'm pretty close to being done. So if you've got questions or comments, please start to get them in. Here's Mishnah number 2. Within the context of the primary category of eating, right, Mishnah number 2 of chapter 2. Within the context of the primary category of eating, for what damage caused with the tooth is an animal deemed forewarned? Now, haven't we already said, wait a minute, with respect to eating, any damage done in the category of eating, and we call that the tooth, but we mean that an animal will walk around and eat what's in front of it, and therefore its owner is always considered forewarned with respect to eating. It's not like an innocuous ox and a habitual goring ox, right, a tam and a muad. Rather, with respect to eating, the animal is always considered forewarned. Now, says the Mishnah, it is deemed forewarned with regard to eating food items fit for its consumption. The domesticated animal is deemed forewarned with regard to eating fruits and vegetables. If the animal ate garments or vessels, then the owner pays half the cost of the damage. Now that makes sense. Animals, you can expect that they will typically eat the food that they typically eat. You don't expect that your animal is going to eat somebody else's leather jacket, right? Or you don't expect that your animal is going to eat somebody else's fan, you know? Normally, animals don't eat these inorganic objects or these inanimate, these non-food objects. So if the animal ate garments or vessels, then the owner pays half the damage. As these are not items fit for its consumption, the animal is not deemed forewarned in this case, even though the manner of doing damage was eating. So it's not a blanket statement that animals are considered forewarned with respect to eating. They're considered forewarned with respect to eating food that is fit for it to eat. Now, in what case is this statement applied? That one pays the full value of the food eaten by the animal? It is in a case where the animal ate the food on the property of the injured party. But if the animal ate food in the public domain, the owner of the animal is exempt from liability. You're walking down a dirt road in the middle of a Wild West town where, you know, the cowboys are going to bring their cattle down the street. Don't leave your sack of grass, you know, lying there where the cow, the ox, the cattle, the horses are going to eat that, because that's now your problem. You should have safeguarded your produce better than that. And even if the animal ate food in the public domain, if the animal derives benefit from eating another's produce in the public domain, the owner pays for the benefit that it derives, just not for the full cost of the food. Now that's interesting. Right? If your ox comes along and if you had, taken it to the livery stable and paid, let's say your horse, and you had paid for your horse to be fed, but instead your horse, happened to be standing next to somebody's wagon that was carrying horse feed, and it ate a bunch of horse feed off that wagon, okay, you're exempt from damages that are caused to the feed on that wagon, but the amount of food that your horse ate, you still have to pay for it because you're not going to get that for free. Now, under what circumstances does the owner of the animal pay for the benefit that it derives? If the animal ate produce in the public square in the area before the storefronts, the owner of the animal pays the benefit that it derives. If the animal ate from food placed at the side of the public square, which is not a public thoroughfare, the owner of the animal pays for what it damaged, as the legal status of that area is like that of the property of the injured party. If the animal ate produce from the entrance of the store, its owner pays for the benefit that it derives, as the status of a store entrance is like that of the public domain. If the animal ate produce from inside the store, the owner pays for what it damaged, right? Because, of course, it was in the property of the injured party. That's Mishnah number 2. Gemara, the sages taught, eating is deemed forewarned in that an animal tends to eat that which is fit for it to eat. How is this applied? In the case of a domesticated animal that entered the courtyard of the injured party and it ate food fit for it to eat, or if it drank drinks that are fit for it to drink, the owner of the animal must pay the full cost of the damage. And similarly, in the case of an undomesticated animal that entered the courtyard of the injured party and tore apart a domesticated animal and ate its meat there, the owner must pay the full cost of the damage. And in the case of a cow that ate barley, although this is not normally a food that a cow would eat, or in the case of a donkey that ate vetches, i.e. legumes, which are usually fed to cows but not to donkeys, or in the case of a dog that licked oil, or a pig that ate meat, the owner of the animal must pay the full cost of the damage, because although these animals do not ordinarily consume these items, doing so is not a significant deviation from the animal's typical behavior. Rav Papa said, now that you said that eating anything that is not typical for an animal to eat, but that it eats under duress is considered an ordinary act of eating, it can be deduced that in the case of a cat that ate dates or a donkey that is eating fish, the owner must pay the full cost of the damage, despite the fact that these animals do not ordinarily eat those items. That's what I've got for us today. Let's take a couple of questions. Looks like we had no problem with the camera. Baruch Hashem, thank God. After yesterday's glitch, I really thought I might have to get a new camera, but it seems to be working. Okay. Okay. Asks Sharon, very important question. What is the schedule for Thanksgiving? Answer, regular schedule. I'm just going to teach at the regular time. It's not a Jewish holiday. I know a lot of people will have to miss the live broadcast, but it will be available for you later. Bill, you know, now that you put the propelled pebble problem that way, say that 10 times, the propelled pebble problem, that way, it's raised a question that's only slightly tongue-in-cheek. Does a Rube Goldberg contraption count as multiple objects, pebbles hitting pebbles, or a single object? Right, so a Rube Goldberg contraption is one that is built, to have an initial impetus, and then it's going to keep propelling that impetus. Now there's a lot of videos like this, right? Like the ball rolls down the ramp, hits the fork swings, it plays a piano note, vibrates a note, sends another ball, and then a matchbox car. Yeah, one thing leads to another, like a big domino trail, really. So why don't we make it simple, right? Because really it's the same question. I've set up a bunch of dominoes, right? So if the pebble gets kicked and propels the first domino, at that point, it's very predictable that all the dominoes are going to fall till the end. And this is not so, difficult to imagine. Imagine somebody, spends a week setting up this huge Guinness World Record domino fall, and I come, and I'm playing fetch with my dog, and I throw the ball near there, and the dog is all excited, picks up the ball, turns around, the ball comes out of its mouth, let's say, and hits the first domino. So where do we end up on that? I don't know that we fully resolved the question about that indirectness, but it sounds like just according to the Mishna, in this case, I think once you hit the first domino, you have toppled the whole thing. And then the only question would be, did the dog, hit the first domino with its leg, or did it hit the first domino with the ball? And I think with its leg, it's trampling. If it was on your property, full damages. With the ball, then maybe half damages. Sharon, I found myself thinking yesterday, are we looking at these examples and wondering if they are really specific to animals, or are we to see these examples as symbolic of a range of events, including human events? Then we have this whole other category of mave, right? So a person, if I punch you in the face, so for sure, right, that's full damages. But if I, bump a person and that person bumps you, that gets interesting. Or if I, take a shopping cart in the parking lot, I'm mad at you because you took my parking spot, right? Obviously, if I punch your car and make a dent, I owe full damages. What if I propel a shopping cart and that dents your car? I'm guessing that's going to be full damages also. But what if I just propel my cart, toward the place where you return the shopping carts to, but I'm somewhat negligent when I do that and a car is passing by and that car gets hit. Now are we in full cost of damages, or perhaps now we're in pebbles? If I'm just walking and the cart's in my way and I simply push it out of my way so I can keep walking, but it dents a car, I did it with no malicious intent. We'll get to these kinds of questions, but for sure, Sharon, your point is well taken, right? We're talking about categories of damages, not only what occurs, in an agrarian and shepherd-based society. Stephen says, did pebbles really cause this much damage during the time of the Talmud? Asking for a friend. It's really hard to gain a higher level of spirituality while arguing about pebbles. Yeah, I think what we're talking about is proximate cause, right? That's what it's really about. And Marjorie, it seems everything can be found in the Talmud. There's a lot to be said about and learned from a conversation that took place over centuries. The gift is that it never ends. Amen. And here we are participating in this ancient conversation. And who knows, maybe with our Q&A, with our questions and answers and discussion, we'll discover, we'll reveal, we'll unearth a principle that hasn't been addressed yet. Maybe the Rube Goldberg question is one that the sages haven't really considered, and we need to consider it. That's what I've got for us today. And with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow, Wednesday at the regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific. And as I mentioned before, on Thursday also, 6 p.m. Pacific. I apologize. I'm sure that's going to, conflict with a lot of people's Thanksgiving plans. But you can always make up the class later. But I'll plan to just teach at the regular time.